Since the dawn of consciousness, humanity has engaged in a battle far more treacherous than any physical war. It is the war against our own suffering. Every civilization, every individual has been shaped by one universal impulse, the desperate flight from pain. But what if this very flight is precisely what transforms us into prisoners of our own minds? Sigmund Freud understood something most people spend their lives avoiding. Pain is not the enemy we believe it to be. Society conditions us to medicate, distract, and flee from discomfort at all costs. We live in an age of infinite escapes. Social media, substances, empty relationships, mindless consumption. Yet despite all these sophisticated methods of avoidance, depression and anxiety rates soar to unprecedented heights. We have become a civilization of emotional refugees, constantly running from the very experiences that could liberate us. Over the next minutes, we will descend into Freud's revolutionary understanding of the human psyche and extract a practical manual for confronting the fundamental paradox of existence, that the path through suffering is the only path to freedom. Prepare yourself, for the knowledge you are about to receive challenges everything you have been taught about happiness and comfort. Law 1. The repression mechanism. What we resist persists. What we attempt to banish from consciousness does not disappear. It grows stronger in the shadows, controlling us from the depths of the unconscious mind. Freud discovered that the human mind possesses a defense mechanism called repression, where uncomfortable experiences are buried in the unconscious. However, this burial is not destruction, it is cultivation. The repressed material gained power in darkness, manifesting as neuroses, compulsions, and inexplicable behaviors. Consider Emperor Nero's fall. Raised in the Roman court, Nero experienced early trauma through his father's murder and his mother's manipulation. Rather than confronting these wounds, he buried them beneath hedonistic pleasure and absolute power. The repressed pain manifested as paranoia and murderous rage. His flight from inner suffering led him to burn Rome itself, as if destroying the external world could silence his internal torment. The businessman working 80-hour weeks to avoid intimacy fears. The social media addict scrolling endlessly to escape her own thoughts. The perpetually busy individual scheduling every moment to avoid uncomfortable emotions. Each escape mechanism becomes a chain. Stop medicating discomfort with distractions. When painful emotions arise, sit with them for 5 minutes without reaching for escapes. Begin journaling about experiences you've never discussed. Your psyche communicates through symptoms. Law 2. The pleasure principle. Trap. The tyranny of immediate gratification. The human psyche naturally seeks immediate gratification and avoids pain. However, this mechanism becomes a source of deeper suffering when it prevents psychological maturity. Freud identified the pleasure principle, which governs the unconscious id, and the reality principle, which the mature ego must embrace. The pleasure principle operates like a tyrannical child, demanding immediate satisfaction regardless of consequences. When we remain enslaved to this principle, we never develop the psychological muscles necessary for meaningful existence. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette lived in Versailles' opulent bubble while France burned with revolutionary fervor. Rather than confronting their nation's suffering, they retreated into elaborate parties and material excess. Their refusal to face painful reality, that their lifestyle was built on others' misery, ultimately led to their execution. Modern society has industrialized the pleasure principle. Dating apps provide endless options without commitment. Streaming services offer infinite entertainment without reflection. Credit cards enable immediate gratification without consequence. Each technology exploits our tendency to avoid psychological discomfort. Practice delayed gratification deliberately. When wanting something immediately, wait 24 hours. Choose difficult conversations over comfortable silence. Engage with content that challenges rather than confirms your worldview. Law 3. The return of the repressed. Unconscious forces always surface. What we bury in the unconscious mind returns in disguised forms through dreams, slips of the tongue, compulsive behaviors, and repetitive life patterns. The unconscious mind has its own agenda, and it will be heard. Freud's insight was that the unconscious possesses its own intelligence and will. When consciousness refuses to acknowledge certain experiences, the unconscious creates alternative pathways for expression. These appear as seemingly unrelated symptoms, phobias, or self-sabotaging behaviors. Vincent van Gogh's artistic genius emerged from his willingness to paint his mental anguish directly onto canvas. While contemporaries medicated their suffering with alcohol and conformity, Van Gogh chose to engage with psychological material others spent their lives avoiding. His madness was actually a form of consciousness his era couldn't comprehend. Modern therapy often focuses on feeling better rather than becoming more conscious. The unconscious material-seeking integration will find pathways through physical symptoms, relationship patterns, or career self-sabotage. Pay attention to repetitive life patterns. The same relationship problems, career obstacles, or family dynamics are messages from your unconscious. Keep a dream journal. Your unconscious speaks most clearly during sleep. Law 4. The transference phenomenon. We repeat what we refuse to resolve. Unconscious psychological material from early relationships gets transferred onto present situations, causing us to relive past dynamics rather than experience current reality. Freud discovered that humans unconsciously recreate familiar emotional patterns, even destructive ones. Unresolved psychological material seeks resolution through repetition. The psyche believes that by recreating similar situations, it might finally master the original trauma. Hitler's rise illustrated collective transference. Germans, traumatized by World War I defeat, unconsciously sought a father figure to restore their power and identity. Hitler became the repository for their collective rage, shame, and revenge desires. Unprocessed national trauma, given political power, sought to traumatize others. People unconsciously choose partners who trigger childhood emotional dynamics. The woman with an emotionally unavailable father repeatedly chooses unavailable men. These patterns continue until underlying unconscious material is brought into awareness. Examine your relationship patterns ruthlessly. If you experience similar conflicts with different people, the issue likely originates within your unconscious material. Before important relationships, ask, what childhood dynamic am I hoping to resolve? We have established the fundamental architecture of unconscious suffering. You've learned that repression creates the problems it seeks to solve, that the pleasure principle becomes imprisonment, and that unconscious material always finds expression. But understanding unconscious mechanisms is merely the beginning. Now we venture into active transformation territory. The next laws require you to consciously engage with forces most people spend their lives avoiding. What follows is the methodology for alchemical transformation, turning psychological lead into gold. Law 5. The integration imperative. Shadow work as liberation. True psychological freedom requires conscious integration of repressed material. What we refuse to acknowledge controls us from the shadows. What we consciously integrate becomes available as creative power. Freud understood that symptoms are not diseases to eliminate, but communications to decipher. Each neurosis contains valuable information about disowned aspects of the self. Integration requires courage to reclaim these disowned parts rather than projecting them. Malcolm X's prison transformation illustrates this principle. Rather than avoiding his circumstances' pain, he used solitude to confront the rage, shame, and confusion driving his destructive behavior. Through honest self-examination, he integrated his shadow aspects. Anger became focused purpose, shame became compassionate understanding, confusion became mission clarity. Most people spend enormous energy maintaining false personas, hiding authentic selves behind constructed images. Social media has industrialized this process, creating a generation more familiar with online representations than actual inner lives. Practice radical self-honesty. Write down qualities you most dislike in others. These are likely your shadow projections. Engage with feedback you normally reject. Explore aspects of yourself you work hardest to hide. Law 6. The sublimation strategy. Transforming pain into power. Psychological energy bound in trauma and suffering can be redirected toward creative and meaningful pursuits. Sublimation transforms symptoms into strengths, wounds into wisdom. Freud identified sublimation as the most mature psychological defense mechanism. Rather than repressing or acting out unconscious material, sublimation channels that energy into culturally valuable activities. Frida Kahlo's artistic genius emerged from transforming physical and emotional agony into creative expression. Rather than being defeated by her bus accident injuries, her chronic pain became source material for revolutionary art. Her paintings document her journey through suffering with unflinching honesty, transforming personal trauma into universal human statements. Modern culture offers countless sublimation opportunities. Entrepreneurs channel early powerlessness experiences into building businesses. Artists transform childhood trauma into compelling work. Social activists convert personal injustice into movements for change. Identify your greatest psychological pain source and ask, how might this serve something larger than myself? Begin a creative practice allowing difficult emotion expression. Channel frustration into productive rather than destructive action. We have traversed the fundamental landscape of human consciousness as mapped by Freud's revolutionary insights. We explored how repression, the pleasure principle, the return of the repressed, and transference create unconscious limitation cycles. Then we ventured into shadow integration and sublimation, the alchemical processes transforming suffering into strength, wounds into wisdom. Together, these laws form a complete system for psychological liberation. They reveal that consciousness itself is the medicine, that awareness is the antidote to unconscious suffering, and that our greatest wounds, when faced courageously, become our greatest power sources. This knowledge carries profound responsibility. You can use these insights to exploit human weakness or develop genuine strength. Use this wisdom to face your own darkness, integrate your own shadow, transform your own pain into purpose. Never use it to avoid the difficult work of psychological development. by focusing exclusively on others. The path through pain is not about seeking suffering, but developing courage to remain conscious when suffering inevitably arises. This is the difference between wisdom and neurosis, between freedom and compulsion. Share which unconscious mechanism you recognize most clearly in your life and what you plan to do about it. If this journey into human consciousness depths resonates with your commitment to genuine self-development, subscribe for continued exploration of forces shaping human behavior. You're like signals. This knowledge has value and encourages sharing these insights with others ready for psychological truth rather than comfortable illusions. The more you flee from pain, the more it dominates you. But the more you face it consciously, the more it transforms from enemy into teacher, from wound into wisdom.